Hello, I'm Dr. Kelly Martin Schuh, Amazon bestselling author, speaker, and women's empowerment coach. And today I have a very special guest. In fact, I'm so excited to have her here. And I just met her a couple weeks ago. I was at a social media event in Denver, and I shared with her what we're doing here at Pink Tent and empowering women and giving them hope, and told her all the women in my community have herpes and they're learning to overcome it and to get their lives back. And Mary, I'm not going to tell you her name yet. This very special person really opened up to me immediately. And I'll tell you, it was like we were best friends. And we just started talking. So at the end of the conversation, I said, would you be willing to share with our community? And she said, absolutely. So without further ado, Mary Alicia, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to read a little bit about her. And when I read this bio today, I was just floored. And then top that off with opening up the video today. If you ladies are seeing this as opposed to just hearing it, in the background, you'll notice a bunch of awards. So this woman is a rock star, and I'm so glad to have her here. Look at that. I mean, rock star status, right, ladies? So anyway, let me tell you a little bit more about her background. So Mary Alicia is a strategic talent acquisitions leader, savvy social media advocate, branding, onboarding, and employment engagement specialist who has her CNA with QMAP or QMAP. People describe her as a professional, positive, and influential, social, energetic, authentic, compassionate, inspiring, loyal, reliable, and talkative. I would agree. I've not known this lady very long, but I read that. I went, that's her. She's got it. Over the years, Mary Alicia has constantly sought to improve herself while remaining true to herself in order to be successful in work and personal life. You would not know at meeting her that she's been diagnosed with ADHD, major depression, and bipolar 2. Although she bowed to the stigma of the labels at first, she now realizes that these labels help people define that these labels help define who she is and help her to understand herself better and do not define her. Do you hear that, ladies? They do not define her. Due to the shaming of her confidence, personality, and high sex drive, Mary Alicia became fascinated by deviancy and how society has defined this term, especially when it created social stigmas. She graduated with a BA in sociology and has continued to keep up on the latest information on social stigmas and how they affect our lives. She's here today to talk about some of her experiences, ways to combat stigma, and to let you know about National Day Without Stigma on October 9th, 2017. So, yay! So, if you could do
so good.
What? I know. It's like, oh,
that's
me. That's me. I'm in it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But I really appreciate it. Thank you. And when I met you, Dr. Kelly, you were just a ray of light too. So I said people wouldn't know in meeting me about the ADHD. They probably guessed the ADHD part, but the bipolar 2 is a lot harder to diagnose because when a lot of people think of bipolar, they think of this person's like, and then going through these, what they call either hypermania episodes or depressive episodes. And mine are more where I'm just a easygoing person. I'm very energetic, don't get me wrong, but I'm not like, I'm not like that squirrel on over the hedge where it's like you give him a jolt of cola and he's just like walking slowly,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How long ago were you diagnosed?
I've actually was diagnosed about 5 years ago. Then I was told no, I didn't have bipolar. I was told I had ADHD and I've been misdiagnosed. And then later I was told I had anxiety disorder, which surprised me because I don't tend to get although I think everybody has a normal amount of anxiety about things. You're getting ready for a conference or you're getting ready for something very exciting to you. We all have a little bit of nerves, but I was never that person that was like, oh my God, house is burning down type. But I did have, and I never thought I was a major depressive person. And what I found is that as I've gotten older, I'm not as I don't bounce back as quickly as I used to.
Okay.
And so, and I always tell people resilience, people think resilience is that you are tough as nails and steel, but resiliency doesn't mean you don't fall down. Resiliency just is how fast you get back up.
That's
And
so
so for me, I've had a few harrowing things that have happened in my life, and each little thing just kind of knocks you back a little bit. Death, loss of children and things like that. They just kind of they hit you hard, and people are like, "Wow, you're so strong," and then you almost get this where you feel like you have to be strong, and you have this outward appearance, but sometimes inside you're sad and you're dying, but it's like, "Oh, I've got to hide that from people," and
yeah.
that's sometimes where the social stigma comes in, because a lot of people that do sometimes end up either hospitalized or having taken their own lives. People are like, well, they were just such a happy person. I never would have known it. Or, oh, they were so awesome. It's because people have this fear of this judgment, which usually stigma surrounds, that they feel like they can't be themselves and they can't let people know when they are hurting, because they don't want to ruin this polished image that people have of them.
Yeah. So when you are in those places where you're more sad, I mean, how do you go about your daily life when you're in one of those places? I mean, like in the workplace. I mean, because one thing I can tell you, when women are diagnosed with HSV, there is a grieving process, and I don't think our culture knows what to do in the grieving process. And so there is this kind of dance of like feeling your feelings, and yet you also have to show up. And any advice on that when you're in that sad place?
Well, I am not an expert. I'll tell people right away. I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'd like to think that I have had a lot of life experience in grieving. And I'll tell you just a little quick synopsis. When I was 12 years old, my mom died in a car accident. And then I ended up going to the military, and my grandpa ended up dying 2 weeks after I got to my first duty station.
Mm,
Uh, and I guess I should step back. 2 months after my mom died, my grandmother, her mother, passed away. Then I lost my second grandparent just upon arriving to my first duty station in the military when I was 18 years old.
wow.
And then my brother ended up dying from cancer 2 years after my father died from stroke. So when I was 25, 27, and then when I was 31, we lost a couple of children that we were very much ready for and knew about and had tried for. And then when I was 35, my daughter was born with a very life-threatening diagnosis, and she actually has been on a Make-A-Wish trip. And in addition to that, she has a lot of physical and intellectual limitations in life. So when I look at grieving, and those are just a few things, but I have also lost my job, a couple times. And when you look at grieving, many people think, wow, there's like, it's almost like there's this finite time that you can grieve. And then it's like, okay, you should be done by now. You should be over this. You should be
Right.
moving on. And it's almost like, no, and grief really, even for some people, it doesn't even hit them right away. So for me, I grieved right away for my daughter, the loss of this child I had hoped for, and I just had to redefine what that image of my daughter looked like to help me get through the grieving process. But for my husband, she looked like a normal little girl, and it wasn't until she turned about 5 or 6 and wasn't walking like other little girls were doing all the princess stuff like other little girls, could be. And I'm generalizing, but you know what I'm saying. She
Yeah.
didn't look like a typical 5 or 6 year old little girl. And that's when he started his grieving process. So this is 5 years later after the diagnosis. But I've also had, and I'll answer your question in just a moment, where I feel like grief is like a roller coaster, where sometimes it's just going to be a lot harder times where you're just trudging up that little roller coaster, and you're like, okay, I just have to get through this. And then you get to the other side, and you're like, why did I ever think anything was wrong? Everything's going smoothly and fine and quickly, and then all of a sudden you kind of hit that thing. And the roller coaster isn't. Sometimes there's loops and twists and turns, and sometimes you just got a whole bunch of little bumps, and sometimes
Right.
you have the big ones. So grief is not It's not pretty. And grief isn't this ABC, you go through it, because you always hear about the 5 stages of grief, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you can actually re-go over all those 5 stages over and over again over the same instance. So when I talk to people, and if there are people that are grieving, because sometimes it's a debilitating diagnosis, because there has been so much of the stigma. And I'm not gonna lie, I went through it when they told me I had bipolar. I'm like, I don't have bipolar.
Yeah.
I'm not staying up for 6-7 days at a time, and I'm not going shopping, spending, thousands of dollars of money I don't have. And I'm not like calling every friend for 24 hours. That just wasn't me. I love my sleep when I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I love my sleep too. I'm one of these like 9+ hour kind of girls.
right. But I think a lot of times I really didn't know a lot about bipolar.
Yeah.
And I had to go do the research and gain education and awareness over. I'm like, okay, I guess I can see it where they see it from that. And then going to read the DSM-5, where it's this huge War and Peace book on all the mental health illnesses and disorders out there. And I just went and I read up on that. I'm like, okay, I can see some aspects. And that's another thing, is when people do get a diagnosis, any type of diagnosis, because it can be about herpes, can be about bipolar, other mental health illnesses, or STDs or STIs, is there are varying degrees. There are people that will never take any medication and may not have an outbreak for 9 years. They
Right.
may not know if they have an outbreak, but it's not where like, oh my gosh, you're going to have this huge outbreak every 6 months, and you're all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, because there's that stigma. There's this alternative facts, as I like to call it, where
Was
people
that what alternative?
facts
Okay. All right.
that they kind of put out there in society, that you are this social pariah, that if you have sex with anybody that has herpes, you are automatically going to get herpes. And that's not true. And just like it's not true if you hang out with someone with a mental illness, they're not going to be, some people are at times going to need more help than others, but most of the time people with um, mental classifications, because I always hate to say a disorder, because I'm like, oh, that's pretty, again, it's the stigma,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I always tell them that there are just so many varying degrees, and some people can have HSV1 in the genital area, and sometimes people have HSV2 in the oral area, and it's just, will the infection survive in a moist area, and which one does your body want to succumb to? And there are some people that are carriers for years.
Oh yeah,
And
they could be carriers for a really long time. And just to go back to the HSV2, just because I love to throw in little facts along the way. It can be found in the mouth area, but it's generally less than 1% of the cases. But what
right,
you bring up is it doesn't matter where it lives. I mean, when we're really talking about, herpes as a virus, whether it's above the waist or below the waist, I mean, a blood test tells you whether or not you're a carrier, even if you've never had an outbreak.
right,
And again, it's like there really shouldn't be any different stigmas. Like it's in the body and it's in the body, right?
right.
Yeah.
And that was like, so I have HSV1 in the oral area.
Uh-huh.
So I get cold sores occasionally, but not very often. And I've seen some people that get really big cold sores, and some people
Sure.
that they're like so minute, you hardly see them. So that's another thing, is that there's just so many different classifications. How do you know which one you are? And then again, um, you know, they aren't pretty, but a lot of times, even with mental illness, there's just certain times that people aren't, pretty. And I don't know, I just look at it and I think, so people are like, well, oh, I only have HSV1, I only have the cold sores. And I remember years ago when I first started learning about this stuff, and I was sexually active. Gosh, and this is like over 20 years ago, when I was a lot more sexually active, right? Before I got married. And then when you're looking at, and I would tell people, I'm like, okay, because I didn't even think I had it. And it wasn't until the military does all these blood tests, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I had it. And I had it. And I was, for the most part, a carrier. And I maybe present once every 10 years.
Okay.
and so, but that was surprising to me because I didn't even know it. And that's what you find a lot of times with people with herpes, they don't even know it. And so when you
Exactly.
look at the social stigma, wouldn't you rather somebody be open and honest with you saying, hey, I have this
Right.
and I'm taking suppressive medication for it, than to sleep with somebody that doesn't even know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Knowledge. I mean, knowledge is definitely is power. Is
right.
power. Yeah.
So I always think that's so funny because I remember telling people, and then I had probably about 2 or 3 guys just like, oh, I can't, no, I'm sorry, I'm clean, I'm DD free, and I'm like, DD, I didn't even know what that meant
What
back
is
then.
DD free? I've never heard of that.
You have it? I guess it means disease free or drug and disease free or
I've
something like that.
never heard of that. So that's the first. And
All right.
people
So
that are saying that, they probably, many of them have not been tested for HSV because it's not part of a standard test.
right,
Yeah.
and a lot of
But
people
it,
don't
it
know
brings
that.
up the stigma again too, as if there's clean and dirty, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
It like if you tell the person, hey, I have this, I get cold sores, because there are people that may or may not have it. But what I also found is that, and I have read a lot about it now. When I went to the CDC site, a few weeks ago, and it said, is oral sex really safe, or is it really safer? I think is the term they use.
Right.
What you're finding is that that's where a lot of the younger generations are getting the HSV one in the in the genital area. That's not typical. It's on the rise. It's not usual, but they are getting it more because they're taking they are not taking those precautions when it comes to oral sex because they think, wow, it'll be okay. But moist areas to moist areas,
Absolutely.
it's not discriminatory.
Absolutely. And speaking of it being non-discriminatory, I actually was doing a little bit of research right before the call on the National Day Without Stigma, which we'll talk about more later. But listen to this quote by Michelle Obama. She says,
Oh,
the root of this dilemma is the way we view mental health in this country. Whether an illness affects your heart, your leg, or your brain, it's still an illness, and there should be no distinction. And so what arises for me in that is what really is the difference between a cold sore and a genital outbreak. There really is no difference, or an illness of the mind versus an illness of the heart, or diabetes, or, I mean, we live with all of these things. And why is it as a society that we label some things with a stigma? And it's just really, really unfair. So I'm curious, have you experienced stigma with bipolar 2?
ironically, no, because it's not something. This is probably the first where a lot of people find out about when I post about it on my Facebook page.
Okay.
Because it's not something. I mean, if it kind of comes up, I don't try to stigmatize it. I don't
Right.
try to say, hey, hey, world, because when people do hear about it. But if it comes up in natural conversation like it did with you, I just let it go, and because I don't want it to be like, well, I haven't told anyone this, but you
Right.
wouldn't
Well, I
know
couldn't believe
it.
how open you were. It was so beautiful. And then you're talking about HSV and everything. And I'm going, oh, wow, here's a woman that's comfortable saying that she has cold sores and she has bipolar 2, and just your level of confidence behind that. I mean, as you said, most people they would never know, but your comfort level with sharing with someone that's having this kind of intimate conversation. I also think that that's why we connected so fast, because there was this openness of there were no walls, right?
Hmm.
And
And you can learn a lot about somebody because if I see somebody physically shut down in front of me, then
right,
you're like, oh, is that a person I really want to relate with? Is
right,
that a person that is empathetic and compassionate? And they don't necessarily have to be empathetic and compassionate, but when a person I see, and you can often, when you're talking with someone, and I'm sure it happens with you, and you just see them shut down in front of you,
oh,
like,
absolutely,
oh, and then they kind of like take a step back, and luckily, and I when I actually told my boss too when I was diagnosed, and I actually told him when I was having to take a mental health day to go and get some extra counseling, or if I was in just a lower point in my life, because I feel like, but he was very accepting of it too, and I think that also makes it easier, where if I had told him about my diagnosis, and that I need to go get some more testing, because I even told him, like, all right, I have to take this test, and it's like a $520, $520, it costs a lot more than that, but 520 questionnaire, that helps diagnose people on a more firm basis than just talking with them, and kind of gets those little insights to them. And so, and he was very open, and he's like, you take the time, because the way he felt, and this is the way I perceived, is that if you need, your PTO days were your PTO days, and if you needed to take them for a certain thing. But for me, I also, like, when when I was going through a medication change, and I actually ended up going through an adverse medicine change.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if I hadn't have told them, and this medicine put me into the point where it's supposed to help me, right? But that's a weird thing about medications. You've got like citalopram, and you've got, oh gosh, I'm forgetting all the different names.
Oh,
But
don't worry about it. We don't need to get technical, because
yeah,
many of the listeners don't know what it is anyway. So don't worry
but
about it.
I went on a medication, and I ended up just going in a very major depressive, because I was working really long hours, and I just got really sad. So you're wondering, how did I handle it? And I had told them, like, I don't know how this medicine is going to react. It's supposed to just help me, but instead of making me, kind of even out. And some people have this imagination that medication just puts you rainbows and unicorns, but it really just helps kind of like level you out, where you're not too in somebody's face, or again, not sobbing, every time they sneeze,
Right.
and it's one of those things. And because I had told them, they were a lot more understanding, when I did need to take a couple of last minute days, and
Yeah.
people around the office ended up stepping up to help out. And that's an ideal environment that you want to be in. And I know that it's not until we are brave enough to tell our bosses and take those chances, because sometimes we have this image, especially with social stigma, right?
Right.
Where we have seen so much judgment of other people that sometimes we embrace that stigma and judgment. So when I was first diagnosed, I was like, oh my God, I have bipolar 2. I can't tell anybody. And I started doing my research, and I'm like, wow, it's not this elephant in the closet that everyone makes it sound like.
Right.
And now, and like what you're saying, no, I haven't dealt with it as much with my diagnosis of that. I've dealt with it more as an ADHD, and when I was very sexually active when I was at 18 to 22. But what I did find out is that social stigmas, a lot of time, you have more issues with the social stigmas and the judgments of people than you do with the symptoms of the disorder or ailment or viruses that you have.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
That's
mean,
sad, right?
yeah. And I also tell people that if there is, I mean, we live in a culture where there are a lot of jokes about different things, and I think that where the pain lies is when you make that comment about you personally. And it's not that
Like self-deprecating?
what's that?
Like when you're self-deprecating?
Well, it's like, for example, if there was a joke about herpes, so that, people with herpes, and then fill in the blank, oh, they're just sleeping around, or they're this, or they're that, or they're stupid, or they're all the negative things that people could associate with a person who has acquired the virus. And so when people hear these jokes out in the media, a lot of people in the community, they make it like personal, as if that person said that to them. And I said, if you don't personalize it, then it's just, I said, if someone made a comment about someone that was a druggie or an alcoholic or other things that for a fact you're not, and even if it was not a kind comment and it was not nice, you wouldn't bring that information in and think that they're saying that about you. And so what I tell people is, if there are comments in the media that are really upsetting, don't internalize it. Don't make it about you. It's just people are ignorant. That's what it comes down to. People are ignorant.
Well, and it's not just that, because you were talking about earlier, when we look at social stigmas, what are social stigmas, right?
Yeah, let's talk about
it. Right? It's mistrust, right? It's ignorance. It's a lack of education, a lack of awareness. But what does it lead to? When people are internalizing those things, and when they're personalizing it, then you start getting where they start mistrusting others themselves, where they start isolating themselves, and then it leads to this shame. But the worst part, and I don't know if it's this way in the community of that you're in, is that sometimes people don't seek the treatment they need because of those social stigmas.
Absolutely. And
And
isolation is definitely something we see a lot of. Someone will get diagnosed and they'll pull away from all of their family and their friends, and they'll stop doing the things that they love to do because they'll enter a period of depression and being out. I tell people it's common, obviously, to enter a grieving process and at the same time to totally isolate yourself. That's the worst thing that you can do. That it's important to engage in the community. I tell people that giving back is a great way to kind of begin to normalize yourself again. And so whether it's Habitat for Humanity or going down to your local homeless shelter and spending a couple hours with people where your focus is going outwards and helping people, it often lightens how you feel about yourself.
well, and it just feels good to do good things for other people, or to put yourself in an environment. So maybe you're not a big people person, like you and
Right.
I, where you're a big extrovert, but introverts like to be around other people too. So maybe it's just finding an environment, and like you, this community that you've created to help people come together and realize I'm not alone, because that's also where stigma, it's that isolation, when you feel like you are alone and nobody else understands what you're going through, and they may not understand what you're going through, but
Right.
there's a lot of people that understand, the experiences they've gone through, and they can relate,
Yeah.
and that's another thing. Sometimes we get in our mind, you don't understand, you don't know what I'm going through, and
Right.
they just have to realize it is different for everybody. Yeah, there's a lot of people that have, daughters with my daughter's disability, Vicardi syndrome, but it's almost like that rainbow spectrum. They're all different, and one medication that works for one girl that seems similar to your child is not going to work for another girl that has those same limitations, that I thought for sure this was going to be that miracle drug or pill. And so we also have to think that even when we get into these communities, and this is where I try not, I'm not a humble person, but I try not to be where, well, I know it all, or I'm the expert.
Right.
I'm here to help. And I that's why I try to tell people I am not the expert, but I know what I've gone through, and I know how I felt. And if there's any way I can help, or listen, to help you, let me be there. Because some of the worst, I told you about that, some of the worst judgment, or the worst symptoms are the other people that have this social stigma around us. But there is one thing worse, and that's when we stigmatize ourselves. And
Yeah.
because when we stigmatize ourselves, what is stigma? It's, we're looking for the weakness. We're looking for I'm like trying to think of the words, but
It's like feeling broken.
right, yeah, you're looking for your
Broken.
flaws,
Yeah.
right? And it's almost like you're pathetic, right? You aren't worthy of love, or you aren't worthy of being around other people because this happened. And especially surrounding herpes, where people think that it's a stigma of indulgence, right? That you couldn't have got this unless you were sleeping around, when that's the farthest from the truth. Some people can be the safest can be, and they are using condoms and prophylactics, and they can still get it. Condoms are not 100% fail-proof.
No, they're
Sometimes
not.
you're with your spouse of 15 plus years, and then you get herpes, and then you find out that your spouse was cheating on you. You know what I mean? And they didn't even know it, and but they got it. And that's the thing. Sometimes people can look at someone and they're like, well, they do this inspection. I'm like, well, you must not have it because I don't see visible stuff. And it's just not that simple, right?
Yeah.
But when we have to just, again, it's that education and awareness, but forgiving ourselves, because I came from the military. In the military, army of one, army strong, suck it up. You know what I'm talking about.
Right.
What did somebody say once? Pain is weakness leaving the body. I've heard that was another one, that the military used to say. I mean, they just, a lot of those, like, pain is weakness
Very
leaving.
rigid. It's like boom, 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 boom. Very masculine. There's
Very,
not, there's not, there's not a whole lot. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about the military other than having friends and
right.
that have been in the military. But my perception is that it's very much in the box, and it can be very masculine, and you're either over the line or not, or not. and there's not a whole lot of softness, the feminine that allows us to integrate the emotions and to be soft and compassionate towards ourselves, right?
But I think the military, and this is where, and I hope I'm not correcting in any way, but
Yeah.
is softness and being compassionate, empathetic, is that effeminate only? Because there are men that could be very compassionate and empathetic, you know, and
Yeah.
it's just this understanding that, you know, sometimes we are going to fall down and we're going to need a hand getting up. And I think the military has done a really good job of that in the last 5 to 10 years of, you know, the strongest warrior knows how to ask for help, you
Oh,
know.
that's beautiful. Yeah. And for me to clarify, when I say very feminine, I think we all
Yeah,
have masculine and feminine within us. And
right.
that you'll have women that are more masculine and you have men that are more feminine. And that dance is, I think that when it becomes out of balance, when it's so far in one direction, it can be hard to connect, right, into the other.
Right.
And the goal is not to be in the middle. I mean, what a boring society that would be, right? And
Right.
I think for us to just follow our authentic selves and to be authentic. But I do recognize a lot of people are so hard on themselves, and
Yes.
I
We're
think
hardest on ourselves.
what's that?
I think we are. I think
I think
even
we're
as
the hardest on
individuals,
ourselves.
even people that have low confidence or high confidence, sometimes we still are hard on ourselves because, like, when we do get that criticism, we're either like, "Oh, I knew I couldn't do it right," or "Oh, I know how to do it right." And that's what you know. I wasn't meaning to. You know, when I was telling you about that, you know, it's just that in you want that where people can understand that there isn't this one size that fits all,
Yeah,
and there are other people that, you know, sometimes we do need a, and this is also another stigma that's been coming around. I don't know if it's been in your community or not, but in the mental health community, it's oh, you don't need medicine. Oh, just go do yoga. Go get mindfulness.
and so right, and then there can be feeling like you're getting it wrong or you're not doing it right, or yeah, there can be a stigma around that, which is ridiculous.
Oh, and it's like, you know, oh, why can't, you know, I was able to do it. Why can't you? Have you heard
Right,
that? And
right.
that's hard. And that's also creating those social stigmas. And Michelle Obama said it best is it doesn't matter if it is physically noticeable
Right.
or it's internal, it's still an ailment that needs to be addressed. And this is where I want to impress upon more is that depending on you, you know your body best. You know your support network best. You know who you can turn to or who you can't turn to. But I actually had a girl say to me, and this might make me tear up, but I put on, you know, when I gotten in my diagnosis, I put sometimes the you don't know the limits of possibility until you go into the impossible. And
Mm.
sometimes, I mean, that's just such a powerful quote. And I'm trying to remember, it's by some guy named Al something. He's important, okay? Just know
Okay.
that.
All right.
Big space and technology guy. And I didn't even use it for that reference in any way. But she ends up messaging me. And she was also, and this is, I'm coming new into this world of diagnosis because I've always been quirky. I've always been a little bit out there, but I've never
And that's
been,
a good thing,
right?
right? Like,
It's the labels we bring ourselves down on. It's like before it was okay. We're still the same person, right? We
yeah.
just now have this label
Right,
that's been
exactly. That brings, oh, that's beautiful. You're right. All it is a label. I mean,
right.
right? And when we're looking at any diagnosis, it's several symptoms or things that doctors are looking for, and then they put it in a box and a label. And what you're describing is everyone in that box, no two people are the same. And so part of
Correct.
this journey is such an empowering journey, is know thyself first. And
Right. Yeah.
right, and it's like you're right, the same thing is not might not work for you that works for another person. And so I think that's one of the greatest gifts when you have been given a label. Now you're more educated, you're more empowered to have an understanding of, go, wow, that makes a little bit more sense of why this is happening to my body or why I feel this way. But then once you get the diagnosis, not to identify with that of I am whatever the mental illness is, or I am diabetes, or I am herpes. You're not any of those things. These
No.
are these are traits that are part of you, just like the color of your eye, but it's not who you really are. And so one of the greatest gifts for me in being diagnosed in my early 20s to where I am today, it's been a journey of figuring out what's going to work best for me.
Right? And there are a lot of different medications, and one's got, even in the herpes community, that are going to have that's going to work well for one person and
Right.
what. I mean, look at insomnia. You know, there's like, you see all those different commercials for Lunestra and Ambien, and they have all those different medications because some stuff does work better, and some
Right.
people
Absolutely.
to go into the mindfulness. But finishing that story from that lady, she ends up messaging me, and she's like, that quote was so powerful for me because, you know, I had all these people telling me, you know, that I didn't need medication, that I should be okay. And so I went and I tried to go medication free. And then I was struggling, and I was like, but I shouldn't be struggling. You know, everyone's telling me I should be okay. And so, but when I saw your quote, you know, that sometimes we don't know the limits of possible until we go into the impossible. We have to recognize that too, that sometimes when we go into the impossible, it doesn't mean it has to be comfortable for us. And it doesn't mean we have to stay there, because there are people that climb, you know, the highest mountain in the world. And there are some people that succeed, and they're like, you read, oh, this one person did it without oxygen. And then there's going to be 10 more that try to do it without oxygen and die.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
and
Absolutely. Great point.
and
Great
so,
point.
but we know ourselves. And just because the doctor said, well, I have bipolar, I'm like, but I don't think I have bipolar. And I read it, and I can see they just have these parameters. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we have to put in, is that these labels are there to help us get help. And that's how, you know, redefining. And that's why I told you with my daughter, I had to redefine what that success looked like. And I always tell people, you know, if you are struggling with something, read this poem. It's by a lady named Emily, and I can't remember her last name, but it's called Welcome to Holland. Just Google Welcome to Holland and
Oh,
Emily.
wow.
And it's a beautiful poem, but basically it's this point where this person had had been planning on a trip to Italy, had all these plans, and went and learned Italian. And then when they stepped off the plane, they were in Holland. And then they, you know, the Holland language. I didn't, but then once you start realizing that although you didn't get to where you wanted to be, and you can use this in the as a diagnosis of herpes, you are exactly what you thought it would be. But then if you start realizing, well, you know, there's windmills in Holland, and there's beautiful tulips in Holland, and you look at the benefits for like for people in your community, they know that they have found you, and they found a source that they can get help through. And it's just redefining what your life looks like, but not labeling it, oh, you know, my life is over, because it's not. It's just changed.
Yeah.
And
You're in a
that's
different.
how you look at it.
That's a great analogy. I totally love that. I did notice that it cut out there just a little bit. So if
Oh,
you could just real fast give me a quick, like, shortened version of, because it was cutting out just a little bit. But what I got from it, and make sure I got it, was this woman was planning and go to Holland, and then she got there and
no, she was actually planning to go to Italy, and she had
oh,
learned
that was a piece of cut out. I was like, I'm missing something here. That's what I'm having you repeat it.
yeah, it was called Welcome to Holland because she studied Italian, and she learned Italian, and she learned all of. She wanted to go to the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and she wanted to eat pizza pie, and she wanted to do all these great Italian things. Go to Venice, but she stepped out in Holland, and then she had to learn that, you know, you could stay mired in the fact that you didn't get to Italy, or you could learn to enjoy the new world you're in of
Got
tulips
it.
and redefine what success looks like, or redefine what that dream looks like. And that's where I think sometimes that's where the grieving process happens. And that doesn't mean that sometimes you aren't going to wish that you had gone to Italy,
Right,
that
right.
roller coaster. Sometimes you're going to wish that you had, but then you think about, yes, but I wouldn't be where I am today if this hadn't happened to me. You
Right.
know, and we have to remember.
Absolutely. And to really look at the gifts. I'm so glad I asked to repeat that, because I know if I was missing it a little bit, that it probably didn't translate. So I'm glad I had
Oh,
you repeat that. So speaking of Holland,
yeah.
what and just kind of what that means to you. I mean, you've been through a lot in life. I mean, you shared in the beginning of the deaths that you've gone through, and loss and having a child that's challenged, that has certain different challenges than other little girls, and all of these things. So if you're to highlight, you're in Holland now, what are some of the greatest gifts of these very challenging things in your life? What have been some of the greatest gifts for you?
Well, the first thing is I've met a great network of people I never would have met before, right? So
Yeah.
I tell people when new families come in, I was like, welcome to the best world you never wanted to belong to, right?
Oh, yeah, I love it. I totally love it. Awesome.
So you meet a lot of different people, and that network grows. And then, so for me, I've always, my natural tendency is, although I'd like to think I'm empathetic and compassionate, my type of personality, I can be a little thoughtless at times. And, it's because I'm so energetic. I want to live in the moment. I want to, experience things. And then but I had to kind of learn that I changed my verbiage. So, like you were saying, when we talk about labels, I don't have a special needs daughter. I have a daughter with special needs. So I have a daughter with intellectual and physical disabilities. You
Right.
know, I so I am not bipolar, but I have been diagnosed with bipolar, and so
Such a
it's
beautiful distinction.
so it's
Such a
it's in
beautiful
that,
distinction. Yeah.
because if you like, I have bipolar, that says that could say a lot of things. It's not descriptive at all. But if I said I have been diagnosed with bipolar 2, I've been diagnosed with, and then that leaves people more like, diagnosed, what does that mean? I find that
Right.
more people ask me questions than just assuming they know what that means.
Right.
um, and I think that's another thing that I've really learned, in these new worlds that I've come into, is learning to reframe how I look at things, but how I say things.
Yeah.
Because it is one thing to say, well, you made me feel this way, or my daughter's diagnosis did this to me, instead of, wow, because of my experiences, this is where I am. Or when you said this, I took it this way, or, and you don't mean to, but we do tend to internalize and personalize. But a lot of times we can't mind read. Heck, sometimes we don't even know why we do some of the things we do. How can we guess what somebody else is doing, why they do, right? Have you ever done that? I was like, why did I pick up that chocolate bar at the shopping mart? I didn't want to do that. I knew I didn't want to do that. And sometimes things that we do are self-conscious, and it's
Yeah.
trying to give people, I think another thing I do better is I give other people more of a benefit of the doubt.
Mm.
Because when we see a child with special needs, or if somebody says, I have bipolar, I have herpes, isn't it a natural curiosity that we want to know more? But when you have things with stigma, you feel like you can't stare. You can't ask them.
Right.
You can't say, hey, what does that look like for you? What has that done to your life? So I
Wow.
feel like it allowed me to be more open, because, man, when you're when you're cleaning up Phuket in the bedroom, you're like, oh, I asked for this,
Right. Right.
because whenever you become a parent, you're kind of asking for those life experiences that could come with that.
Right.
And it's just learning, and then just asking people the question, what does it look like to you? Because too often we want to try to define it for them, and
Yeah.
I don't want people to define it. So I try to say, I don't let people define it. I'm like, do you have any questions? Did
That's
I see
great.
somebody look at my daughter, hey, do you have any questions? Especially another child, because I see too often, like, don't stare, don't. I'm like, so ask,
Yeah,
and
no, that's so beautiful. I talk about creating curiosity in our lives, and what a great trait to have. If we looked at life with the curiosity of a child would look and say, "Oh, that looks different. What's different about that? Or how does that work?" Or, I mean, I think cultivating as human beings that curiosity is so important, because it also creates connection.
But and thinking of that, how often have you seen? And I don't know if in what circumstances, but examples for me, it's like one child was like, why can't you walk? And they said it's my daughter, and so my daughter's nonverbal, and she's just looking at him, and
Yeah.
the mom's like, don't ask that, and I'm like, but why? Why did the mom feel that she had to say that? Because there is this social stigma that you can't recognize when there are differences, and a
Yeah.
lot of kids nowadays in the last, a lot of people talk about how the millennials have had everything handed to them, and I look at, yeah, they may have had things differently. But if you look at it, they're more accepting, they're more in sharing, they're more about diversity, they're
Yeah.
more about inclusion. And when you look at that, and now when you're looking at the young generation, and they still have yet to give them a name, but let's call them the Z generation, right? They
Exactly.
don't know a time without information sharing. They don't know a time without all the diversity around them, and they don't. They are like, why are people being like that when they aren't being inclusive? Because they don't understand.
Yeah.
And my daughter has grown up in classrooms with other kids that are typical. That's also another thing I've learned. I say typical instead of normal.
Oh, another great lesson. Okay. I
Because
mean,
what is
that kind
normal,
of
right?
things, it's through the conversations. I mean, you're teaching me things, and
Oh,
you
go on.
are, you are. I mean, and words are powerful. The distinction
Oh, yeah.
between normal versus typical, it has a different energy. It has a different feeling, and typical is more appropriate for what you're just, what you're sharing.
Right. And another thing is like, you've heard me say the word energetic instead of hyper, but
Right.
ADHD is hyperactivity disorder. And it's, again, one's a much more powerful positive word than the other word that has a social stigma
Yeah.
surrounding. And I
Yeah.
think it's how we learn to define ourselves. And again, without defining ourselves, does that make any sense at all?
It absolutely does. One of the things that I teach when we're talking about the power of language, language can totally change how you feel, just one word, right? And so what I teach women is that if you hear or when we speak about herpes, if that one word really triggers you, and as you even self-reflect of going, well, what if you just knew that you had a skin rash? How would that change the internal dialogue? Because it's just as true as
They're
herpes,
right.
or that I'm a carrier of the virus. Now, obviously, I want to be very specific. We're not talking about this when you're disclosing. You want to be clear when you're
Yes.
disclosing to someone. So I'm not trying to beat around the bush, but when
No.
we're talking as far as a language of healing,
Right.
a skin thing feels
Yeah.
different than a venereal disease.
Right, and you don't have to call it a venereal disease.
Exactly.
If you say the word herpes, and again, it's being able to say it without stuttering yourself.
Right.
It's getting to the point where, and sometimes you just almost even have to talk to yourself in the mirror and like, I am beautiful, and gosh darn it, people
Yes.
like me.
Exactly. What was that? That was this is Jackie from Saturday Night Live, right? Or whatever. It's like, I forget what it was. I should put that up somewhere. And people like, I love that. In fact, I just saw a video clip recently. Someone in our community shared it, and it was this little girl, maybe 3 years old, and she's standing on a countertop, and she's looking in the mirror, and she's doing affirmations, and they're viewing it from the back. They're doing a video, and she's like, "I love my sisters. Today's the best day," and she's like emphatic, and it's so beautiful. And we all need to be doing this. We all need to be looking in the mirror and reminding ourselves who we really are and who we can become in the journey.
Right, because you can have a diagnosis and like, all right, I have herpes, and we didn't really talk about it here, but I told you how one of the things. So I learned about that I had HSV1, but when I was probably about 30 something, let's just put it that way,
Yes.
I had a friend that thought that they had contracted herpes, and they were freaking out. I mean, I'm talking about pool of goo,
Yeah.
twitching in the corner, fetal ball. And I was like, why are you so worried about that? And they're like, because it's herpes. And I said, so what does that mean to you? Well, and then they started to think about it, and they're like, well, it's bad. I'm like, why is it bad? And they're like, do you have herpes? And I'm saying, what if I did? And I said, like, they're like, do you? I'm like, does it matter? Like, I'm wondering why you're worried, because me having herpes isn't going to affect you. Why are you worried you might have herpes?
Oh,
And
brilliant.
they were like, they started thinking about it, and I'm like, let's go look it up. And so we went and looked it up. And I'm like, did you know that 85% of people in your age category, and this is an older person that worried about the dating statuses and stuff, and they're like 85% of people in your generation have a form of herpes,
Yeah.
whether it's HSV1 or HSV2. and they don't even know it. You could have it. I don't have. I'm like, you could. Have you ever been tested for it? Of course, I get STD testing once every 6 months. Have you ever looked at your results? And I said, and I dare you, go get that result and bring it to me and tell me if it has herpes on there. And they went and got it and got back to me a couple days later and like, you know what? It isn't on there. So,
Right.
and then they went and got the testing and they didn't have it. And but they did have HSV1 and they had never known because they had never had the
Yeah.
outbreak,
Right.
And he was like, but then he started doing his research, and he started seeing how many people did have it and how people could get it even if they didn't think they had it and da da da. And he's like, well, it really isn't as bad as I thought it was. But it wasn't until he had this scare. And
Yeah.
here he's talking to this person that should be sympathetic, right? Because that's what we want. We want a sympathetic ear. Somebody's like lamenting to us, like we want them to be on our side. And when you have this person saying, what's the big deal? It's like, well, you are not freaking out with me. And this is not what I was expecting. And that's where stigma stops, is when we stop meeting those societal expectations. When
Absolutely.
when we're like, oh, why are you saying it's a big deal? It's not a big deal. And
And
so
and the power of you asking questions refocuses the mind, so the mind gets really clear of what's going on here. When you ask somebody, well, what does that mean? And they have to stop because their mind's racing, 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 racing. And you say, what does that mean? And they're like, and in a moment they have to think about it. And then when they can actually slow the mind down to answer the question and then take a look at it and reflect and challenge it. What does it mean then? Right? It actually reminds me of the 40-Year-Old Virgin movie. And there was a question in there, and I forget how he framed it. And my husband has said it before, and it was just so funny. It was like, do you want to date? Well, do you want me to date you? It's like you come back with a question. It's like, it's really funny, right? And, but yeah, questions lead to changes in state because it refocuses the mind.
right. But you don't want to always. My favorite quote is when the guy is like, do I from what is it, Dumb and Dumber? Do I
Yeah.
have it with you? Like if I had to define it, I know I'm not quoting it right, but he's like 1 in 100. She's like more like 1 in a million. He's like, oh, so I have a chance.
I love it.
And so that's what you kind of have to look at. Sometimes things seem bleak, but you know what? Possibility is not the same as probability.
So true. Tweetable moment.
Right?
We just had an Oprah tweetable moment.
Oh yeah, it's all about just ending the stigma with us and not stigmatizing ourselves and forgiving ourselves and what I mean forgiving ourselves, because we sometimes think that forgiving brings closure. We have to let ourselves know that sometimes we'll never have closure.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we never may know why somebody did something purposely, or why they didn't use a condom, or why they lied to us, or why didn't they go get tested. And sometimes we're never going to have closure and know the answers. But it's okay to forgive ourselves and forgive them, and at least say to ourselves, this is a learning moment.
Yeah.
And we can move forward. And again, how has my life changed? Is it going to kill me? No. Am I dead or dying? No.
Yeah.
And sometimes what is important to us, and then it's just, and sometimes, you know what, and I'm going to be honest, some people will never get over that label. No matter how much community and how much, we ask them to, hey, really, what is the big deal? But now, now there are options for other people. They do have not antibiotics, because you can't really
The antivirals.
there are antivirals, and there are booster shots for kids to help make them more resilient to those viruses.
Yeah. So yeah.
Am I wrong, or do
Well,
you know?
not for herpes, but yeah.
Okay, maybe it's just the not HIV. What is the one that's really prevalent right now, even more so than herpes?
Hepatitis.
Well, hepatitis is growing, especially in the elderly community. But no, there's one more. It starts with an H2, not HSV2. It's the papilloma virus. What's that?
Oh,
HPV.
HPV, human papillomavirus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that one.
Yeah, the HPV, which will be another conversation. I've got some probably differing viewpoints, but what we have is options. What we have
Yes.
is options, and our job is to educate ourselves so that we can make the best decision for ourselves. And that's what I'm such a proponent of, whatever it is that you're talking about, because you're going to find different people with different opinions, and to discover your true opinion on anything, I think education is really the gateway.
Right. And remembering that different people are going to receive different education. And sometimes we can
Yeah.
like, that is not how I read it. And that's okay because different people are going to
Perspective.
read the same article as you
Yeah.
and take it differently. And it's how you define it. And then surrounding yourselves with the community that's going to be supportive of you and what you're looking for.
Absolutely. I tell people there's no cure but community right now, and community is just such a gift. And to go from hiding that secret, and not that you need to go and tell everyone, right?
Right.
But the moment you share your secret, whatever your secret is. In fact, I was on the site, which we'll go into because I want to know kind of what you know about the Stigma Day. But I went to their website like right before we got on the call, and there was this gentleman, and I can't wait to learn more about him. In fact, a shout out to Frank Warren. I'd love to interview you. I do not know this man, but I watched a little 3-minute clip, and he was just so inspiring. But anyway, he said, and he had up on his arm written in black marker, it said, secrets can be walls or bridges. Secrets,
Right.
walls or bridges. And I was like, brilliant. Like, I want to interview this guy. But it's so true. It's like when we can share our secrets, even if it's with one person, that shame begins to drop.
Right, because it's that isolation. When we make something a secret, when we're like, nobody else can share this with me, sometimes we don't know that there is. And think about this community that you're providing for people didn't exist 20 to 30 years ago. You know, with the rise of the internet, it has helped a lot of the stigmas come down because now we are like, well, I am not alone. I
Yep.
mean, when you can read that there's somebody that like, wow, there's nobody else out there like me. And then you go and search on the internet and then you find out, wow, there's a lot more people like me than I thought there were.
Right.
There are. And even in my community of only 2.6%, when you're thinking how many million, billion people are on our planet,
Yeah.
and then you multiply that by 2.6%, you're in the thousands to hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And we can access all the community on the internet as if there aren't any barriers or walls or bridges to go over, you know.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I think of it that way. And there are, there's just so many different ways to combat it, stigma right now. And then the more we do destigmatize it, and the more, we do, listen to the Frank Warrens that, hey, what is so bad?
Yeah.
Like I told you about my friend that freaked out about the herpes. I had another friend that was afraid to come out as gay for the longest time. He didn't come out until he's 35. And then everybody was like, what's the big deal? Okay. And they just went about eating, like he would invite them to dinner. And it's like, well, I want to share this with you, and it was like, okay,
Okay, next, right?
because
I
it's
mean,
not, and sometimes we make it this big pillar and,
this big mountain, this big elephant, and we have worst case scenario running around in our mind, and rarely does the worst case scenario show up.
right, because we're still the same person that before we told them. Now we just know something more about them, right? Or know something more about ourselves. And then if that person isn't willing to support us or help us, again, ask yourself, is that a person you want in your life?
Right.
And you
Right.
can still have them in your life because maybe they're your, I don't know, somebody that's really close to you that you can't kick out, like an in-law or something. But
Exactly.
what can you do to minimize that exposure if it's something that they bring up all the time? But again, the more you destigmatize it, the more others can
Yeah.
destigmatize.
Yeah. And I think that destigmatization can start with self, and then begin by sharing just with one person. I mean, we have a community. Pink Tent is a community. It's a place where anonymously you can go and you can share your story, and you don't have to leave your name or anything. And just getting the words out is so therapeutic. And then once you've done that, try on telling a best friend or someone that you can trust. And so that's how it all starts. I mean, I can remember when I was first diagnosed in my early 20s, it starts with telling one person. I told my best friend, and I told my mom and my sister at the same time. And it was like, okay, so I didn't hold this secret so tight for very long. And I know that that was so helpful for me.
Cathartic, right?
So cathartic. So
And another thing is that if they were to ask you, just ask them those questions. So I'm about to tell you, and then don't like, oh my God, debilitating illness here, and you just tell them as if it is just another. Don't make the special meeting. Don't just in a passing conversations. Well, and you can even introduce it in a way. Well, man, when I was talking with my brother about herpes, and I let him know I have it, he was really surprised, and he was like, oh, it's not such a big deal. And then you go on with the conversation, and this person's like, you've hit them with a train wreck, and then you just move on, and you make it seem like it's not a big deal. And
yeah,
sometimes that's the easiest way to go. And sometimes inside it's a bigger deal than it is, and we're kind of letting it slip. But if you do it that way, then it's almost like they're like, well, she doesn't think it's a big deal. Maybe I shouldn't think it's a big deal. And maybe they do, and maybe they'll ask, and maybe they won't.
yeah,
But I almost think of it as like sexual identity. Do we have to let people know who we're sleeping with? Do we have to let people know that we're either, LGBTQLP,
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter because when we bring up those things, is it their business to know? But we could say, hey, when I was, talking with my husband the other day, and you're a gay guy, and you just continue the conversation, you're not making it a big deal. And we
Yeah,
should be able to say, I talked with my husband or wife or spouse or partner the other day, or you know what I mean?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
we shouldn't have to hide that, like, oh, what will I think? Because again, if they think like, oh, I don't want to be around you because you are gay, then we don't want to be around that person anyways. I know I
Absolutely.
keep bringing that up, but
No, it's so true.
I could talk over and over and over about that stuff. But now it's how do we get more of the message out there? How do we combat it? How do we help people combat
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. So with that, Mary Alicia, you're the one who actually shared with me. It's coming up October 9th. It's National Day Without Stigma. How did you find out about it? Is this something that has been ongoing? I don't know a whole lot of the history, but when you shared with me, I was like, oh my gosh,
Well,
that's
I know,
awesome.
I believe it started with Stand Up to Stigma, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
You kind of
No problem.
froze. So did I freeze?
Yeah, you froze for a
Uh,
second. That's okay, but the audio is good. You're froze.
oh, oh no, the connection now. So we're starting to lose each other.
We are. We are.
Okay, I think it's gotten better, but I think it all started with Stand Up to Stigma Day,
Okay.
and then they, then asking different, people to step up to do chapters and Facebook pages for their area, and I believe that with the national, you know, destigmatize day, National Day Without Stigma is what it's called,
Yeah.
is we start thinking about now Stand Up to Stigma Day and the National Day Without Stigma. Those are more mental health awareness and
Right.
addiction focused. But I treat it with everything because a stigma is a stigma, and how can I get the message out there for other things? And that's the first thing to getting rid of stigmas is one, the education and awareness,
Yeah.
right? Is
Yeah.
knowing what we can do to educate ourselves and understand, like with mental healthness, oh my God. That was not a Freudian
There
slip in
are
any
some
way.
aspects of that sometimes.
But so with mental wellness, it's the getting the education and in mental wellness, you have to take care of yourself and you have to figure out what works best for you.
Absolutely.
So it's getting the education, getting the awareness out, uh, and then sharing that. And seeking treatment
Right.
because or helping others seek treatment. Like, and many people think that it's just about themselves, and maybe it isn't about them at all. Maybe you have a friend that's been struggling. It's like, how can I help you? You
Yeah.
know what? And make yourself available. Sometimes people won't accept the help because, again, it takes a lot. I'm a big army person, and it's very hard to say, hey, I need counseling. And so I've destigmatized that. I mean, like, I get counseling, and when I find myself getting sad, I know it's not logical, but remember, emotions aren't logical.
Right.
What can I do to go and get a little extra counseling, call my doctor, call my psychiatrist, or have a review? Because sometimes even medications can work for a period of time and then they no longer work. So it's, again, constantly seeking that treatment, trying new options if that works for you. Because some people can be on the same option for years and it's all right. Some people can. The whole point with medications is always to work to a point where you don't need medications, but they're there to help you if you
Yeah,
need
absolutely.
yoga, counseling, what will work for you. And then I would say the other way is get involved. What you were talking about, can we create a community around something that means something to us?
Yeah.
uh, so with those awareness campaigns, or the stand up to stigma, National Day Without Stigma. What can we do to have an event in our area that helps promote that? Whether or not we feel that stigma comes towards us, especially if we don't have that stigma surrounding us. We don't have herpes, we don't have a mental illness, or we aren't addicted. That's sometimes the most powerful message of all, is the message of support.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun today. My guess is we could have this tape rolling and rolling and rolling for hours. But
oh,
we'll close it out. And you are just such a bright soul. And it's just so wonderful to have you, share what you've been through and some insight. And I see a lot of how the areas of stigma, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. I think that's one thing that was a common thread throughout our conversation today. It really doesn't matter what we're talking about. That really secrets lead to shame, lead to isolation. And in the end, seeking out help and community is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. So thank you. And if you're listening to this, you're not familiar with Pink Tent, go to pinktent.com. And we have a community where you can share your story about living with herpes. We also, I've written a book. It's on Amazon, Live, Love, and Thrive with Herpes. It's also on my website. And really, it's about discovering hope, overcoming the stigma, and getting your life back. I really think that this is just the beginning. Wherever you are and wherever you want to go, it is totally still possible, not even still possible. Life is a box of chocolates. And have fun, live, love, and thrive. And thank you, Mary Alicia. And signing off.